Hi, and welcome to Chief for Yourself. It's great to have you with us wherever you are in the world today. Our guest on this show makes his second visit to the program. Matthew Fox is a preeminent scholar of Western mysticism. He was a member of the Dominican order within the Roman Catholic Church, but became an Episcopal priest after being expelled from the Catholic Church by then Cardinal Ratzinger, who later became Pope Benedict. Matthew Fox is the author of more than 30 books, including Meister Eckhart, A Mystic Warrior for Our Times. A little bit about Meister Eckhart. He was a 13th and 14th century philosopher, theologian, and mystic who lived and worked in the Dominican order. He was among the most popular preachers of his time, with teachings that not only focused on deep contemplation, but also deep action, and that ultimately led to him being put on trial and condemned by the papacy. He took on the vested power interests of patriarchy, economic privilege, and religiosity in his day. He paid a big price for it as well. After his condemnation, his work was pretty much shunted aside deep in the Western consciousness for centuries. And Matthew, I usually wrap up the program with a reference to our guest's website, but I'm going to turn things around this time and bring up the header on your site, MatthewFox.org, which welcomes friends of creation spirituality. And there's also a great play on words calling creation spirituality revolutionary and evolutionary. Talk about creation spirituality, what it is, and what it has to say to us in the 21st century.
Well, of course, creation spirituality is about the sacredness of the earth and our bodies and all the other things that we share the earth with. But it's about original blessing, theologically speaking, because blessing is really a theological word for goodness. It's about the goodness of creation. And that, of course, distinguishes it from the ideology of original sin. One of my books that the Vatican objected to was a book called Original Blessing. But in fact, I've proven that book, as other scholars have proved since, that original sin is not in the scriptures. The Jewish tradition does not talk of original sin. It's not something Jesus ever heard of. So why is the church building so much of its structure on an idea that Jesus never even heard about? So creation spirituality, of course, respects science, because science exists to tell us what's going on in nature, where we come from, and we have a new creation historical science. We come from a journey of 13.8 billion years, and it's been an amazing ride, and we're all part of it. And there's also a creation spirituality that also respects women wisdom and the divine feminine, because wisdom is feminine in the scriptures and in many traditions around the world. And this is the tradition of the wisdom literature of Israel, is really the tradition from which the historical Jesus derived. All scholars agree on that today. And wisdom is about the revelation in nature. As Meister Eckhart says, this great 14th century mystic who referred to it, that my new book is about, he says, every creature is a word of God in a book about God. Says, if I spend enough time with a caterpillar, I'll never have to hear a sermon, because one caterpillar is a source of God. So that's the idea that every creature is a source of revelation. That too is part of the creation spiritual tradition. Finally, I've proven that this is the oldest tradition in the Bible itself. The J source is the oldest writer in the book of Genesis, and that tradition is creation-centered and not human-centered. Anthropocentrism and the whole idea that the God is revealed only in the Bible book and not in the book of nature, this is contrary to the creation spiritual tradition. It's really contrary to our ancestors' deepest faith experience.
Well, there's obviously a lot of respect for science in the writings of Meister Eckhart and creation spirituality too. What does that do to the standard story of creation, where in 6 days everything was put together by a sky god, and then he, being a man, sat back and rested? What do we make of that?
Well, it's mythological, of course, and there are truths there. To look for, but you can't find them if you're thinking literally. Obviously, that's not the way humans think. We think in terms of stories and myths, and so there are many stories and many creation stories in the Bible. The Bible begins with two creation stories that are very distinct. They really contradict each other. So that itself is a warning not to take these things literally, but to look for the meaning in them. Then there are many other creation stories in the Bible. John 1 is a creation story. The story of Bethlehem and the birth of Jesus. Those are stories too. They're not historical facts, but they have deep mythological meaning, and that's to be recognized. So the fact that we have a story from science today that's believed around the world is really a wonderful thing, because human tribes just define themselves by their creation stories. So it's part of our becoming one species again, you might say. But at the same time, we don't have to throw out all these other stories that our ancestors had. Each one of them has some wisdom to it. For example, the one great story that I like is from the Apache people of North America, who say that first God created the dog, and the dog was lonely. But then God created humans. Well, you don't have to take that literally, but in terms of meaning, it has meaning, and that is that to keep us humble. That we're here to befriend the dog is one way of reminding us of our humility, how we should be humble.
Meister Eckhart stood up to the patriarchal structure, and he was a champion of peasants in Germany as well during his time. And also, he was a backer of the women's movement. Hard to imagine a women's movement at that time. They were called the Beguines. Tell us about the Beguines.
Right. Well, the Beguines began about the end of the 12th century, the late 1100s, and they flourished. In fact, at first the Pope supported them, but toward the end of the 13th century, the Pope got very threatened by them and started to denounce them. In fact, Pope John the 22nd, the same Pope who condemned Eckhart a week after he died, condemned the Beguines 17 different times, which would suggest that the condemnation was not sticking very well. There were at least 1 million Beguines in Europe at that time. Now, the Beguines represented for women an alternative lifestyle, because until that time, women had just two choices: get married or join a convent, a cloistered convent. And the Beguines, they grouped together in small communities, and they worked with their hands. They did not take formal vows, but they supported the poor and the young and the sick. And they often worked with as craftspeople, weaving, for example, sewing, making stained glass, and they were very interested in learning. But most of them were lower class, and so they did not have formal education. But they were very much interested in learning, so they would gather together and learn, and they gathered people like Meister Eckhart, who was a Dominican, as you said, and Franciscans too, to teach them and to work with them. And that's just so clear in Eckhart, is that it was a mutual thing. He taught them, but they also taught him. For example, they had images of God as female, and Eckhart says, what does God do all day long? God lies on a maternity bed giving birth. So their emphasis on creativity, but also on the divine feminine, is very strong in Eckhart. And I'm sure that came through his work with the Beguine women. And they also wrote books, Magdalene the Magdeburg, Beguine, who died when Eckhart was 20 years old. But her book, The Going Light of the Godhead, was translated into Latin and so forth, and got considerable distribution. And other Beguines, Marguerite de Perret was a French Beguine. She was burned at the stake in Paris in 1310. But Eckhart actually uses some of her ideas in his own sermons, which shows, first of all, his respect for her, for the Beguine women who were doing their own thinking, but also his courage that even though she was burned at the stake for that book, he actually employed many of her ideas in some of his sermons. So that speaks to his courage as well as his solidarity with women.
I have to kind of smile when I see the word expelled. You were expelled from the Catholic Church. It's like getting a note from the principal and sent home. Talk about the conditions at that time, the time of your expulsion, what you did to kind of run afoul of the Catholic Church, and what finally got you booted out.
Well, Cardinal Ratzinger, who did the booting, gave a list of 7 objections to my work. Number 1 was that I'm a feminist theologian. I didn't know that was a heresy, but I guess you think so. Number 2 is that I call God Mother. Well, I proved that all these medieval mystics called God Mother, not only Meister Eckhart, but Mathilde and Julian Norwich, and so forth. Number 3, I prefer original blessing to original sin. Number 4, I don't condemn homosexuals. Number 5, I work too closely with Native Americans. Now, I don't know what that means to work too closely with Native Americans, but I do work with Native Americans. I derive great benefit from the rituals, in particular, from swear lodges and vision quests and sun dances. And I've had, when I had my faculty in the West, I always had Native Americans teaching us, because I think there's a lot of wisdom there that we all need to drink in again. So those are the objections, and really they're like a Rorschach test. Oh, another complaint was that I call God child. Well, I don't know what else Christmas is about if not that. And furthermore, Meister Eckhart says God is the least, the newest thing in the universe. So I think this is like a Rorschach test of their objections to my work. It shows that they're very, very threatened by women, and also by original blessing, and also even by the young. It's a kind of adultism that they can't conceive of God as young, as an old, tired Senex, like apparently many of them are in the Vatican.
Mm-hmm. Growing up, I remember.
Pardon me?
No, go ahead.
Until this new Pope, I think he's got a different view of the world than previous to, so I think he's less adult and less afraid of these teachings that Ratzinger was.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of the new Pope, when I was growing up, I remember being infused with optimism, rightly or wrongly, over the Second Vatican Council, Pope John the 23rd. Now we have Pope Francis taking the reins to a big worldwide reception, being the first South American Pope and all, even though he does have Italian lineage. And he's a Jesuit, which is an order that I believe came to be during the Counter-Reformation. And the blogs are going crazy with us. Like, is this really going to be change, or are we getting business as usual?
Well, I think he's definitely trying to bring about change. There's a lot of resistance, of course, because for really 3 generations, for 34 years, the papacy has been expelling thinkers. I'm just one of 105. In my book, The Pope's War, I give the list of 105 theologians that were silenced and expelled and hounded. And when you expel thinkers, you, of course, invite yes men on board, and that's what most of the bishops and cardinals have been for the last 34 years. And that's a lot of time to create a whole structure of unthinking hierarchy, and that's why you had the pedophile crisis for one thing, is that these people responded so stupidly. So conscience. They're the yes men. That's what the last two popes wanted for 34 years. That's what they have. So these people now are resisting, a lot of them are resisting this new pope. And it's really kind of amusing to stand back and watch it, because they're the same ones who previously said everything the pope says you have to obey and honor. So you're right, there was an optimism in the 60s because of Vatican Council and because of great movements that came out of it, like the liberation theology movement of South America. But that has been killed by the Vatican, and as I point out in my book, The Pope's War, also by the CIA, who worked very closely with the Vatican to kill liberation theology. Mm-hmm. A priest I know who knows a lot about Latin America said to me recently that Pope John II killed at least 10,000 people in Latin America by attacking liberation theology and basic movements and giving wind in the sails of the kind of people who murdered Oscar Romero and others all over Latin America. So it's pretty serious stuff that's been going on in our lifetime, and it's still going on. But I give the new Pope Francis credit for trying to steer things in a different direction. But to be honest, I think it's too late. By that I mean the structure has lost its credibility, the whole pedophile priest issue, but also 2 generations have grown up outside the church because of its anti-intellectual and extreme right-wing positions. So they're not about to go back. So I think that the Holy Spirit has, in fact, wanted this to happen, that we got 2 schismatic popes in a row who are ending the Catholic Church as we know it. So I think it's time to push the restart button on Christianity and draw out what's really valuable there, and then let the rest go. And I think that's what we have to do, travel much more lightly, as I say, without basilicas on our back, but simply backpacks on our back. I think that's what the world needs. We have to link up with other spiritual traditions. We have to face the issues of ecology, of education, of economics that will work for everyone on the planet, all the humans and all the other species as well. And I think that's really the future of religion.
Is that what you just said, those points of change there, is that what you meant when you were quoted as saying we need a new Reformation today?
Yeah. Yes. When Ratzinger made himself Pope as Benedict XVI, I went to Wittenberg, where Luther had founded his 95 Theses. And I went there because Ratzinger, like Luther, was a German. And I founded 95 Theses, and I called for a new Reformation. And, those theses are available on my webpage in a book called The New Reformation. I wrote that, and I spelled out those 95 Theses that I think would summarize what a new Reformation would be like. But the Protestant churches, too, have their issues. It's not the same as the Catholic Church. It's not so rigid hierarchically, but there's an ennui there, too. So I think the whole Christian movement has to be shaken up and shaken down, and I think that's what really history is demanding of us at this time.
Contemplative life is seen as solitary. It's very solitary. Meister Eckhart tells us to take action. In action, we connect with people. How do we get involved and build a community?
Well, yes, I think Eckhart is so deep that he's really saying we have to take action from non-action. Our action has to flow out of our contemplation, which is our love of the world, not just out of action-reaction, which is, of course, the reptilian brain response thing. So, so community is built by people gathering to celebrate life, to share our joys, as well as to share our wounds and our grief and our struggle. So I think all that is part of the spiritual journey that Eckhart is proposing, and creativity plays a big role in it for him as well. He says, what good is it to me if Mary gave birth to the Son of God 1,400 years ago, and I don't give birth to the Son of God in my own person, my own time, and my own culture. We are all meant to be puppets of God, he said. So, and we are all meant, he said, to give birth daily to the Christ. The Christ is always needing to be born. So there's a tremendous emphasis in his work on creativity. And I think that's part of his feminism. And in one of my chapters there, I put him in the room with Adrian Rich, the great feminist poet, and they have a lot of things in common in their teaching. And this is one of them. The goddess is birthing, according to Adrian Rich, that to birth is to do what the divine feminine is always doing.
Those who see themselves as progressive Christians and those who follow creation spirituality may become more active, even though they're contemplatives, but should they become politically active? Would you see members of the movement leading a progressive party, let's say?
Certainly. I mean, politics is obviously a way in which so many things are done either to heal and to celebrate and to create justice, or the opposite, to create more injustice, to despoil the planet for future generations, or to encourage greed and envy. So politics is a very profound vocation, and of course Christians should enter politics and should be wise and thoughtful citizens, and they should run for office if they feel so called. So we're all drinking in the politics and the economics of our time, whether it's poison or whether it's healthy. We're all subjected to it. So any thinking person, of course, has to have a political awareness and want to apply their values to political positions. For example, I mean, the whole scandal of Citizens United telling us that corporations are humans, or persons, have the same rights as individual voters, so that now crazy billionaires can throw as much of their money into an election as they want. I just think that's an abomination. I think it's the absolute destruction of democracy. It's now about an oligarchy. It's about which billionaire will throw the most money around. So citizens have to stand up against this and call foul and start a movement for a constitutional amendment or something to get democracy back, so that ordinary people, not just billionaires, have an equal voice.
In the book you talk about an interfaith movement, and I'm wondering if Meister Eckhart were with us today, would he suggest this interfaith move as a way, let's say, of dealing with radical Islam in the world?
Well, absolutely. Interfaith is so important to Eckhart, and that's really the basis of my book, because in the book I put him in the room with Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist, because many Buddhists see the Buddhism in Eckhart's teaching, which is really amazing, because he never met a Buddhist in his life or read a Buddhist book. But he went so deep into his own experience as a Christian contemplative that he found truths that Buddhism also preaches. So there are whole passages that I reproduced there in Eckhart that sound pure Buddhist. I also have a chapter on Hinduism. Kumar Swami, the great Hindu cultural historian, wrote a book in the 1930s, and he has a whole chapter on Eckhart. And in it he says, reading Eckhart is like reading the Upanishad. Oh my goodness, that's the highest compliment a Hindu could pay. And he also says, whole sentences in Eckhart sound like they're translated from the Sanskrit. Now here's Kumar Swami calling Eckhart a Hindu. Then when I did my first book on Eckhart 30 years ago, which had 38 of the sermons with a commentary after each, the first response I got was from a Sufi. And he didn't just write me a letter. He wrote a paper, a 12-page paper, taking just 5 sentences, a little paragraph from Eckhart, and saying he will meet Eckhart as a Sufi, and he spent the 12 pages exegeting these 5 sentences from Eckhart to prove his point.
Mm-hmm.
So here, this is an amazing person, Eckhart, and then I begin the book with a chapter on Eckhart and Rabbi Heschel, because he shares so much of Jewish spirituality and the issues of awe and wonder, as well as compassion and justice. Then I have a chapter on Eckhart and shamanism, because I put him in the room with Black Elk and with Eddie Niebuhr, an Aboriginal teacher. And so he also has a lot in common with shamans. So Eckhart is uncanny, and I think that's why we couldn't understand him until today. Today we are all rubbing elbows with people of many other faith traditions. And Eckhart is a tremendous leader in that regard, not because he studied them all, but because he went so deep into his own experience that he came up with many of the universal truths that all the world religions are striving to teach. And I think that's really important at this time, that we find what our religions have in common and what how they're trying to grow us and develop us. And Eckhart is an astounding leader in that regard. I don't know anyone, living or dead, who has the credibility that he has to lead us on that deep journey of faith, to spirituality, what I call deep humanism.
We talk of the historical Jesus, Jesus the mystic, Jesus the practicing Jew. What might Eckhart say to the devout Christian, or you might say to the devout Christian who insists that Jesus, the man, was God? Well,
Eckhart really says that we're all sons and daughters of God. We're all other Christ. And that's really not something he made up. That's really the first writings of the Christian scriptures, but it's often been muffled or covered up through the ages, especially when Christianity started to take over the Roman Empire and to run empires for many, many centuries. But really, Eckhart is talking about the cosmic Christ, which is the divine presence in every being in the universe, and the historical Jesus. And you might say, if you take the image from science of light, and Christ says, that the light of Christ is found in every being in the universe, well, science is now saying that there are photons or light waves in every atom in the universe. So light is both particle and wave, according to science. So the particle part is the historical Jesus. He was an individual just like we are, his own history and his own number of years on the earth. And but then the wave is the cosmic Christ, that is the divine presence in every being. So we're all particles and waves. We're all light, and that's, I think, part of the impact of seeing the world as Eckhart does, through the eyes of the mystical dimension of the cosmic Christ. But he also is very much in tune with the Jesus scholars today. I have a whole chapter on this, because they too recognize that the historical Jesus comes from the wisdom tradition of Israel, which was a Grecian spiritual tradition. That is to say, in that tradition, nature itself is a revelation, not just the Bible, but nature. And of course, now that we know nature is 13.8 billion years old, that's a lot of revelation. And that is what Eckhart is celebrating, and we should be doing the same. Instead of fighting science, we should be learning about science.
The book is Meister Eckhart, a mystic warrior for our times, from Matthew Fox, the website matthewfox.org. Matthew, thank you for writing the book and for bringing your courageous clarity to these topics. I hope you'll come back and visit us again. You're always welcome.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you for having a program like this where we can talk about things like this.
Well, we appreciate you as always, and I wish you well in all that you do. And like I said, come back again. For today, just have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, Matthew. Be well. Bye-bye. Matthew Fox, and we will link to Matthew's website MatthewFox.org. When you go to chiefforyourself.com, you'll, of course, see the link and get the replay of the show. And remember, too, when you're there, to enter your email address to stay up to date on what's going on with the program. We had a little hiccup last week and had to reschedule Matthew on the show, and he was gracious enough to come back and to do it with us this week. And we have some great shows coming up in the future, too. I'll be telling you more about those. You'll see the information, times, guest schedule, and such when you subscribe to Genulines. The blog posts will give you all that you need to know to let you know what we're doing. And so it's going to be an interesting rest of the year, I know. We're talking to some people with some new works out, books, and other travels that I think you'll want to hear about. So stay with us and stay conscious. That's what we're all about, consciousness and keeping up the good vibrations, as it were. That's going to do it for today. Be well, and thank you so much for visiting. I will talk to you soon.